Alrighty, g'day and welcome to Maneuver Warfare. In this video I'm going to explain my basic house rules for PanzerBlitz. The reason I'm doing this is I intend to do a couple of playthroughs, scenarios of PanzerBlitz, and I'll definitely be using my house rules when I do that. So just a bit of background, I'm a massive fan of PanzerBlitz and most of the Avalon Hill games. While the game's not perfect, like it does have its faults, I believe the rules as is create a great, well, for one, a great game, but as you'll see in the application I'm going to use it, it gives you as a tactical commander, I suppose, a challenge. So it always gives you a dilemma, which I think is the object of a war game, to sort of give you the challenges that may be experienced by commanders in the field. I believe a lot of the problems with PanzerBlitz, not exactly misconceptions by players or the designers, but at the end of the day, it's trying to apply, or people try and get wrapped around the axles about a statistical approach, I suppose, or almost a mathematical approach to things like armor penetration values of anti-tank guns versus the armor values of the tanks and the sloped armor and all this kind of thing, which is, as the designers' notes say, how they came to come up with the attack factors and all that kind of stuff. However, obviously the combat is representing a battery or a platoon of anti-tank guns versus a company of Russian tanks or a platoon of German tanks. So, it's a bit of an abstract method to come to this level of warfare that's representing. And I do find it amusing. I'm a big fan of Squad Leader as well, that PanzerBlitz is touted as, even on the box, it's the game of platoon warfare, when in reality, when you're playing the game, as a commander, you're commanding all these platoons. So really, it's almost a divisional or regimental sized force that you're commanding. So you're really at that level. And the same with Squad Leader. A squad being one counter, you're actually a company or a battalion commander when you're commanding all those cardboard units. So the intent of my rules are not to revolutionise the game of PanzerBlitz, but just amend a couple of problem areas. I do believe they were followed up pretty well, these areas, in Panzer Leader and Arab-Israeli Wars. The latter I'm not particularly familiar with. I've had a bit of a glance at the rules, but I've read it's quite a good system. So I think the danger of making house rules is making the game too complicated. I'm sure that the designers looked at various rules. Obviously, they're trying to balance between playability and realism. So sometimes they'll just discard rules, to make the system more playable. So they may well have done that with some of these. Like I said, I do believe some of the people's complaints with the game are a bit of a misinterpretation. Not that they're playing the rules in the wrong way, but just what it's trying to achieve. So, for example, Opportunity Fire, which became available in Panzer Leader, I'll demonstrate a bit later, but just because of the way PanzerBlitz, you move units and attack, it doesn't really need Opportunity Fire, or it's not appropriate to have Opportunity Fire. However, the weakness of that is that sort of Panzer Bush idea where you can just move from forest hex to forest hex across the open ground and be invincible. So in this video, I'm going to concentrate on, I may break it up into a couple of parts, but I'm going to concentrate on my house rules. So the main intent is a bit of a restructure of the indirect fire mechanics, a restructure of the close assault tactics, and something that gives a bit more oomph, effectiveness to the infantry and infantry guns, the smaller mortars, something that are pretty normally useless in the game, but also reflects the command and control that was utilised in these conflicts and sort of still today. And then also I do have a basic opportunity fire rule, which you'll see why, as I said, it's kind of appropriate to do that. So probably the biggest change is the indirect fire procedure. So I'll touch on that now. Okay, so my indirect fire rule. So the main thing here is, as I said, a weakness is that the more units that you have stacked in a hex, basically in the game, the less effective indirect fire would be, which isn't really realistic, because basically indirect fire, you want to target enemy concentrations of units. So yeah, it's actually better off, you know, the more units you have in there, the better. So that's not really very well reflected in the game of PanzerBlitz. Let me just find one of the original hexes here that I forgot. Boom, that's done. So yeah, I addressed that, and also, as I said, just making the mortars more useful. All right, so let's get into it. Also, I've written all these rules on a sort of blogging website called Medium. However, I'm just having a go at the video side of things. I think Medium is starting to get a little bit paywalled. I'm not sure. I'm pretty sure my articles are free, but if you want to have a look, I'll hopefully add the link. And I'm also using Vassal, the Vassal engine. I'd love to film actually live board, which I had a bit of a go at, but maybe I'll do that a bit in some other videos, because I just love the look of it. But just for ease of explaining, I'm going to use Vassal in this case. Okay, so indirect fire rules. So basically we need to look at each unit. So firstly, howitzers. Okay, so I've got a couple of German howitzers represented here. So normally the Wesp counter, but the 105 and the 150. Okay, so howitzers using direct fire have their range halved. Okay, so that's a big thing to remember. So there's a couple of ways you can look at it, but all other rules for direct fire remain as per the original terrain effects chart and weapons effects chart. So you can either think of it as you're halving the range, or you can only use direct fire up to half range, and I'll explain that in a sec. So for example, I've got some T-34s laid out here, so I'll just use this line of sight. So the maximum range that you can do, so the Wesp's got a range of 32 and attack factor of 40. So the maximum range you can do attack out to with direct fire is 16. So you're halving the range for direct fire. And as I said, the weapons effect chart, as we know, at under half range, non-anti-tank weapons are halved. So he's got a normal attack factor of 40. So if he was to target this T-34 with direct fire, range of 6, normal attack factor of 40. This T-34, range of 13. Okay, so remember, I can do a direct fire up to 16. So that's over half of my direct fire capability range. So I'm going to halve my attack factor to 40. This T-34 out here, you can see it's in line of sight, but it's a range of 18. So I'm not allowed to do direct fire on that one at all. No worries. So howitzers using indirect fire. So whenever you use your indirect fire, okay, so your range is the same. So in the case of the Wesp, it would be 32. But they always have their attack factor half. So always attack factor of half. And you'll see why that is shortly. So the attack factor is going to be 20. Okay, so, and again, you will use the TEC chart, which I'll explain. So howitzers may engage targets using CPs to call in their fire, to use indirect fire, or they may spot for themselves using indirect fire. So again, this T-34 way down here, it's indirect line of sight. However, it's too far to use indirect fire. Correction, too far to use direct fire. But this unit, without any other spotter, can use indirect fire to engage that weapon. It's just adjusting its own fire. So basically, the reason I have this rule, the big one is indirect fire, so you'll see why shortly. But at that range, you know, over 4 kilometers, at a shorter range, you're trying to get one hit on one tank. You might be able to fire anti-tank rounds, etc. At a range of over 4 kilometers, getting on 5 kilometers, you're not able to do that. You're just calling in fire as you normally would for indirect fire. So howitzers can use CPs and only CPs. So CP units will call in fire, or they may, as I said, spot for themselves using indirect fire. CPs may carry out their function from within a half track, armoured car, tank, truck. Okay, but I'll use that unit as a sign for them the whole game. So this represents the forward artillery observer, being assigned that vehicle. So a truck, it'll represent like a Kubel wagon. A half track represent, whatever, an armoured car, or the half track or whatever. Okay, CPs spot fire direct line of sight as per the normal direct fire rules, as if they were firing, i.e. they cannot move or fire themselves. If vehicle mounted, obviously they can't move by themselves. In the turn they call in fire. If spotting from a non-adjacent hex, they need other units to spot the target for them. Okay, so that's just makes sense. So it's as per the normal direct fire rule. So if this CP here was calling in indirect fire from this WESP, okay, they've got direct line of sight to this 234. However, they would need a spotter because the 234 is in the town. The rifle can do the spotting for the CP. The CP calls in the indirect fire. If it was a T-34 out here in the open, direct line of sight, doesn't need the spotter. It calls in the indirect fire. Okay. Weapon effectiveness chart. Howitzers always have their attack factor halved against armoured targets. Always against armoured targets. So keep in mind, I've already halved their attack factor to 40. So now attacking armour with indirect fire. Okay, so it's going to be 20. Now attacking armour, it's going to be 10 at any range. Okay, there's no minimum engagement range for indirect fire. Okay, it doesn't have to be over half range as per the original rules. Okay, at the end of the day, you can do indirect fire in reality at 500 meters, etc. If the enemy's adjacent, you're going to be doing direct fire anyway because it's more effective. Okay, if that's very confusing, I've done this little bit of a chart here. So again, you can think of it in two ways. You can either say that the WESP in this case has got a new range factor of 16. Okay, for their direct fire, so they can do 1 to 16, okay, with that normal attack factor of 40, and so their new half range is 1 to 8. So if they were attacking this T-34, which I'm not going to be able to move, if they were attacking the T-34 within that sort of half range, sorry, I know what it is, let me just edit the document, boom. Yeah, if they were attacking the T-34 within this half range, so 1 to 8, it's attack factor of 40. Okay, 9 to 16, that's over half of the direct fire attack factor range. Okay, it's an attack factor of 20. Any range at indirect fire, okay, indirect fire has an attack factor of 20. It's going to be halved again to 10. All right, so a little bit confusing, but it makes sense. Okay, mortars. Moving on to mortars. So, sorry, I'll just summarize that. So, to be clear, direct fire, half the range, attack factor remains the same. Okay, then apply your weapons effectiveness chart. Indirect fire, keep the range the same, half the attack factor, then apply your weapons effectiveness chart. And against armor at any range, indirect fire, the weapon effectiveness chart is halved, so it's going to be attack factor of 10. Okay, mortars. Mortars are units that are specifically attached to infantry formations, and therefore only infantry formations units can utilize them. So mortars were, down to say battalion level in both the Soviet and the German army, and also in the armies in Panzerleader. So whether you're in a Panzer division or whatever, the infantry in that Panzer division were assigned the mortars. So therefore, infantry can spot 4 mortars. So there's no direct fire for mortars. They are simply spotting for themselves, as I explained with the howitzers. So they can see the target. They're not trying to hit the target with one round. They're just calling in the indirect fire, and they're adjusting it themselves. Okay, so you're always using indirect fire with mortars. Therefore, all indirect fire rules apply for mortars engaged in target that is in direct line of sight. Okay, so yeah, I'll get to that, sorry. And the key is we do not halve the attack factor of mortars. And again, I'll explain why shortly. It stays the same. So with the Germans, okay, because of the radios that the Germans have down to potentially platoon level, indirect fire can be called in using any infantry type platoon, so infantry, engineers, security, SMG, when those units are dismounted. Only Russian Guards units may carry out that function, okay, as per those experimental rules in the original game. Okay, nothing else may spot for mortars, including CPs. So what I'll do with the CPs is, using the original scenarios, I'll just add CPs if you have artillery, just to make the rules work. Okay, all calling in fire is as per my direct fire rules that I mentioned with the CP, except the infantry may carry out any other action in the turn they spot for indirect fire. Except for unload and load, so it doesn't matter. I'm not going to explain every rule here, I guess. Okay, CPs can be used for mortars in special circumstances, e.g. the situation 8 for the Russians, which was a really good explanation where they had the CP could be used a kilometre from the mortars to spot. So that represented basically the field phones, which is quite realistic. So about a kilometre away, field phones, you have your OP set up, you have the mortars in the rear, good to go. Okay, and as per the other indirect fire rules, mortars attack factor is always halved when attacking armoured units, regardless of range. Okay, so why have I done this half range and not half range, etc.? So, a correction, the attack factors, etc. So when you have a look at it, all right, so if I'm using let's use the 150 or the Hummel counter, okay, direct fire is going to have attack factor of 60 down to 18. Now let's look at the field gun, the 150mm field gun. So same caliber, it has an attack factor of 20, so 30 versus 20, down to 12. So the range is sort of comparable. At the end of the day, the 150, the infantry gun fired a heavier shell. Okay, but why is the attack factor less? Well, if you actually look at it, the German, in PanzerBlitz, the actual organisation, that gives you the organisation. So the 150mm infantry gun battery has 2 150mm guns, while the Wesp battery, or the 150mm counter, has, the Hummel, the 150mm counter, the Hummel, has 6. So there's actually 3 times as many guns in this battery versus this battery. So there you go, that works straight away. 23 times 60. Okay, so what about indirect fire? Okay, so it's going to be halved. So 30, the 105s is 20. So let's look at the dangerous 120mm mortars of the Russians. So I'm saying they've got an attack factor of 24 versus 30 for the 150 versus 20 for the 105. So this makes the 120mm mortar more effective than the 105 and almost as effective as the 150mm howitzer. Is this realistic? Well, if you look at the weight of shell that the 120mm mortar was able to fire and the rate of fire and the amount of tubes, you'll see that is realistic. Okay, so the 120mm mortar is able to put down a lot of HE in a short period of time. So yeah, that's all fine. Okay, so why have I done that? Why have I halved the attack factor for indirect fire? Well, as I said, I believe it's realistic because you're not targeting individual tanks, gun positions, infantry positions. You're just calling in a pattern of fire. So how does that work? So when I've used my spotting rules, so infantry for mortars, CPs for howitzers, what I then do is something I believe is similar to Arab-Israeli wars. So the units in the hex being targeted by indirect fire are attacked individually using the appropriate attack factor, taking into account weapons effects chart and the terrain effects chart for each target. So I basically treat it as an indirect fire attack on a hex as a separate attack on each unit, as if it was by itself. As I said, this is realistic because there's no reason why a field gun in the woods and it gets attacked by a 120mm mortar, just because it's got some infantry with it, does that make it better protected? Of course not. So it's attacked individually. And so I'll do an example shortly. Terrain effect chart, hilltop have no effect on indirect fire correction because it's just flat or whatever. Indirect fire's high trajectory should have no effect. However, slope hexes, I'm saying the opposite, they're always halved. So regardless of the location of the firer, so mortars firing at adjacent unit on slope still have their attack factor halved because mortars always have to use indirect fire. So this reflects the difficulty in achieving burst patterns on sloping ground, the cover afforded by gullies and undulations on the slopes. Okay, so let's do some examples, all right? So let's have a look at this case here. We've got as I said, the dangerous Russian 120mm mortar. Okay, well, who can call in indirect fire from the 120mm mortar? It can do it itself if it has direct line of sight to the target. So if we look at this infantry unit here, you can see it's got direct line of sight. However, the infantry is in the forest. So as per the normal direct fire rules, for them to engage, they would need a spotter. Well, they do have a spotter in this rifle unit. So this represents the rifle company doesn't have radios. However, they may use prearranged light signals, flags, whatever, to indicate, yep, they need help. The battery commander observes the target, calls in his own fire. So yep, in this case, it'd be 24 versus 8 with a +1. So 3-1 +1. As I said, the hilltop, no effect. Okay, now let's consider this attack over here. So we've got a range of 15. Okay, we've got this guards unit here. Now the guards unit has got radio, now can call in indirect fire from the 120mm mortars out of line of sight. Alright, so they can call indirect fire on these two units. So we can see here we've got a rifle unit and a Panzer IV. So how do we resolve this? As I said, we break it up into two separate attacks. So 24 versus 8 of the rifle unit. That's going to be 3-1 with a +1 for the woods. Now versus the armor, automatically halved versus armor at any range. So now it's 12 versus 8. So that's 1-1, or call it even money with a +1 due woods. Okay, to save time, we might want to, here we go, combat result table. Okay, we might want to save time by just doing one roll. I've thought about this, I guess it doesn't really matter. So, but save time, do one roll. Where does that turn up? Oh, can't quite see it. Okay, so this will be good. So let's say it's a roll of 3. Okay, so versus the infantry, 3-1 +1 with a 3 goes to 4. It's dispersed. Even money with a 3 +1 is a 4, no effect. So you can see you get two different results on the same hex, which is realistic. So the armor wasn't affected, the riflemen are dispersed. Okay, so that's how I use my indirect fire procedure. So you can sense straight away that it does make these field guns, etc., very vulnerable. So if I was to replace that with, say, one of these field guns, all right, you can see that now targeting the field gun, okay, 24-2, it's going to be 4-1. So the field gun pretty much going to get destroyed at all times. Is that realistic? Well, I guess you can always roll a 6 and it'll be untouched. But yeah, artillery pieces, mortars, etc. Okay, they might be dug in, but The crew are vulnerable. You've got ammunition. You've got the transport. Okay, they're very vulnerable. So, yeah, it's not totally unrealistic. Okay, so that ends my indirect fire rules.